The following program contains graphic material. Viewer discretion is advised. Tony Hardy stalked the streets of King's Cross in London looking for women to kill.
A man who was driven and compelled to carry out crimes that were simply heinous.
His hero was Jack the Ripper, and like him, Hardy believed he would never be caught.
He always said he could beat a psychiatrist.
His trail of violence began in Australia, but ended in horror at Hardy's London lab.
The bodies were dismembered using a hacksaw, but also an electric power saw.
Hardy would kill 3 times, arranging his victims' bodies in a bizarre satanic ritual before dismembering them, so earning the grisly mantle of the Camden Ripper. Anthony Hardy nursed an ambition to follow in the footsteps of Victorian England's most notorious criminal, Jack the Ripper. When Hardy took to the evening streets, no prostitute was safe.
Jack the Ripper, he did talk a lot about. He was fascinated by his brain. When he went into deep things, like, you know, murders and Jack the Ripper, well, that could go on for hours.
One night in November 2002, Bridget McLennan, a sex worker, was looking for punters. She did not spot Anthony Hardy furtively watching her. 2 weeks earlier, another prostitute had disappeared and Hardy's neighbours had heard mysterious sounds coming from his flat.
He had an electric jigsaw, I think, and a hacksaw, so he used both.
What puts Bridget's life in such great danger is the fact that Hardy, seen here on CCTV, believes he shares the same destiny as Jack the Ripper, to escape justice.
Perhaps he was teasing people. Perhaps he was teasing the police. Come and get me. I'll beat you again.
Hardy asks Bridget if she'd like to go back to his flat. Her answer will decide if she lives or dies. Anthony Hardy is born in 1952, the son of a miner. He's one of 5 children who grows up in this street in a working-class Staffordshire town near Burton-on-Trent. His early life is unremarkable.
He seems to have been a sort of uncomplicated child, a bit quiet, a bit of a loner.
One who quickly decides that labouring in the region's pits was not a life for him.
His father was a miner, and they were from perhaps the lower middle classes, which he didn't like.
It was normal that you follow your father, so it was expected that Anthony would go down the mine. He obviously wanted to choose something better for himself.
The young Anthony Hardy works hard to improve his prospects.
He seems to have been a very bright child. He went to a grammar school, obviously passed the 11+, was doing very well. He won a place at Imperial College in London, very good university, where he read engineering and succeeded in getting a degree. So obviously he was a bright individual.
Anthony Hardy's intelligence would become a key characteristic that would shape the unspeakable crimes he would later commit. He was already beginning to think that few people could match his intellect.
I'm cleverer than you. That was what would come out of this, because at the end of the day, academically, he was cleverer.
It was whilst at Imperial College that Hardy discovers he has a way with women.
I think someone was attracted because he was very smart and very good looking.
And one woman in particular, Judith Dwight, who worked at the university, found his looks and mental prowess an irresistible combination. In 1972, she becomes his wife.
She was probably his equal in terms of intellectual achievement and understanding. And they appeared a fine match.
After graduating, Hardy becomes an engineer with British Sugar, then one of Europe's biggest food manufacturers. It's a high-status job for the high achiever. Everything seems set for a normal, happy marriage. The couple start a family. But things are not as they seem. By his late 20s, Hardy has become abusive to his wife and their children.
Well, I think it's pretty clear, looking at the history of their relationship, that it wasn't just a little bit of domestic violence. Anthony Hardy was pretty much what we would call a stereotypical abuser.
The predisposition to extreme violence will often be accompanied by a willingness to use violence against your loved ones.
As well as becoming habitually violent, Hardy, now travelling with his job, establishes a lifelong addiction to sex, any way he can get it.
He was in a position to be able to carry out a series of affairs and probably use the services of prostitutes.
As Jack the Ripper had targeted vulnerable prostitutes who he treated violently, so Hardy will follow suit.
A number of prostitutes came forward to say that they had encountered him. A lot of them gave harrowing accounts of how violent he was during the sex act. Some women said they were unable to breathe whilst he had sex with them. Others claimed that he was just incredibly violent and seemed to be into sadomasochism.
In the mid-70s, the working-class boy who'd grafted hard to transform his fortunes loses his job. It's not his fault, just an economic downturn, but he suffers depression and mood swings and is given medication. Today, he would be diagnosed as bipolar, a condition then uncategorized and one which can lead to exceptionally violent behavior. It's the start of a mental illness that will shape his life forever and end the lives of others that he encounters. By the late 70s, now a father of 4, Hardy gets a new engineering job on the other side of the world. The family emigrates.
The family have been very excited about a move to Tasmania. I mean, it sounds very exotic. It sounds the place where a family would consider themselves starting afresh.
But his move to Australia does not reduce Hardy's desire for sex outside of his marriage. Detectives will one day establish that he still has affairs, still visits prostitutes, still abuses his wife.
The group of men who are particularly dangerous and the group of men who serially commit domestic violence are usually incredibly controlling individuals, and Anthony Hardy was one of those individuals.
In 1986, for the second time, Hardy is caught up in a round of job cuts.
Certainly things took a turn for the worse after this.
Hardy's marriage isn't working. He's clinically depressed and has yet again been thrown out of a job. Throughout this time, he has maintained a fascination with Jack the Ripper. He's regularly seen reading about him. But whilst the 19th century slaughterer used crude methods to kill, Hardy chooses a more devious means for his first attempt at murder. The victim? His wife.
He tried to create a perfect crime. He actually used his scientific knowledge to be able to carry out a crime that he hoped would be undetectable.
He fills up a bottle from the tap, tightly screws on the top, and places it in a freezer. He knows that in just a few hours, it will be a perfect weapon.
And of course, when that bottle defrosted, the murder weapon no longer existed.
As the water slowly freezes solid, Hardy puts the rest of his evil scheme into action. He turns on the tap to run a bath.
The amount of planning is quite unusual, that he would plan that far in advance.
The bath is now full. Everything is set for the gruesome crime he intends to commit. Hardy approaches the mother of his 4 children and attacks.
He hit her in the head with a frozen water bottle. He had been planning to kill her for some weeks.
He hits his wife until the blows render her senseless. How could he make it look like an accident?
When she was stunned and semi-conscious, he took her out to the bath and tried to drown her.
Investigators might later find a woman knocked unconscious by a fall as she entered a bath, dead from accidental drowning. But Judith Hardy's fight for survival is noisy. What happens next isn't part of the plan, and it saves her life.
The only reason she survived that particular attack is because one of her children came in the room and started screaming.
Hardy didn't care the effect that had on his child. It was just part and parcel of him getting his own way.
Hardy is arrested and questioned by the Tasmanian police. Faced with the evidence of his wife and children, he makes no attempt to hide what he did.
He confessed to it and said he had actually fully intended to kill her that night. This was a very, very dangerous man.
Anthony Hardy had exhibited a taste for the sort of brutality used by Jack the Ripper and faces jail for attempted murder. But this was in an era when domestic violence was dealt with differently from today.
Their view was 1970s Australia, the same as 1970s England. It's a domestic. It stays at home.
In fact, Hardy uses his mental illness to successfully convince police and psychiatrists that he needs hospital treatment, not a jail sentence. He would tell his friend Maureen Reeves years later that it was all an act to fool people for whom he had no respect.
He didn't like anybody in authority. He said they're not very intelligent because they couldn't catch Jack the Ripper. With the psychiatrist, he said they're not very clever people. So I said, well, they must be, because that's their job, you know, to help people. He said, no, you can tell them things, he says, and they sometimes just agree with you. But he always said he could beat a psychiatrist.
And that is exactly what Anthony Hardy does. Inside a psychiatric unit in Queensland, he cooperates with staff. He takes his medication. He plays the game with just one intention.
One of the things he was able to do was to use his guile to be able to release himself early from the mental institutions.
He evaded what otherwise would have been perhaps a pretty stiff sentence for a crime of attempted murder.
Hardy is soon considered safe enough for release. The chance to stop a serial killer in his tracks has been missed. His wife and family have returned to the United Kingdom. Chillingly, he is now free to track them down.
Even though he had tried to kill his wife, he returned to Britain an innocent man.
Escaping justice may have reinforced Hardy's belief that he can always outwit the authorities. It may also have made him more dangerous. He's got away with it once. What's to stop him striking again?
It's possible that Mr. Hardy believed that being released back into normal life, then he's beaten the system. He beat the police in Australia. As far as he's concerned, he's back, he's number one.
That view is supported by what Hardy does next. He hunts his family down.
On his return to England, Hardy wanted to exert that control that he had back over his family.
He starts to relentlessly stalk his ex-wife, the woman he's already tried to kill.
She would regularly contact police saying that this guy was still after her. And he became increasingly sinister, increasingly menacing towards her.
As the stalking continues, Hardy starts a normal long-term friendship with Maureen Reeves. She's completely unaware of Hardy's darker side and thinks he's just a regular guy.
He fascinated me because he was a very intelligent gentleman. I think I fascinated him because I was just down to earth and didn't, you know, I spoke how I found people.
Even when Hardy reveals his obsession with Jack the Ripper, there's no reason for Maureen to become suspicious.
Knowing a person for 10 years, how I knew him, and all the discussions we had about different things. All right, yes, he was obsessed with Jack the Ripper. But that to me is not unusual. Some people are interested, some people are fascinated by...
Still being stalked by him, Judith Hardy gets a restraining order, but Hardy's desire to control her life is irresistible. He breaks the order and is punished with a short jail sentence.
Stalkers are very often obsessive people. Of course, obsessions can lead to behaviour which is out of the ordinary and not what one would expect.
On release from prison, he heads to the King's Cross area of London, just a few miles from the Whitechapel streets terrorised by Jack the Ripper more than a century before.
King's Cross at the time attracted a transient population. There was a major train station there. It was where prostitutes, pimps and drug dealers hanged out. For Hardy, this was an ideal place to live.
The decision by a violent regular user of sex workers to settle in a district where countless prostitutes plied their trade is to provide Hardy with opportunities to kill, like his hero, the Ripper. Police in that part of London have no knowledge of the violence that he's exhibited in Australia. Nobody knows the danger that women are in.
That's when we see a deterioration in not only the quality of his life, but also the quality of his mental state. There seems to have been a spiral of deterioration involving drugs, involving alcohol and depression, which led him to the low point and to the horror which we ultimately saw.
One final push completes Hardy's descent from high achiever to multiple murderer. In the late 90s, he is diagnosed as a diabetic, a condition which in Hardy's case causes impotence. His solution? To seek out increasingly deviant sex to satisfy his needs.
For a man who's already violent, who already suffers rages, perhaps, and who is already a misogynist, to then find that he cannot achieve satisfaction in the usual ways and has to go further and further, that's going to be a problem.
Anthony Hardy is set on a road to destruction. The consequences seem inevitable.
He is a sadistic and controlling individual. He suffers with psychotic incidents. So we've got a man who is not totally in control and who is, to put it in simple terms, a ticking time bomb.
And that bomb is about to explode. Anthony Hardy is living in an area of London teeming with prostitutes and drugs. The life of a man who considered himself a major intellect is in pieces.
He would go for long periods without washing properly, without changing clothes.
He craves drugs and sex. Both are close at hand.
It became very easy for him then to make contact with other vulnerable people, vulnerable women. And with somebody like Hardy with a cunning and clever mind, he was able to construct situations and turn those situations to feed his obsession.
It is 1998. Hardy, like the original Ripper, is roaming the streets of London preying on prostitutes. Still to kill, he has stayed one step ahead of the police. And then a sex worker accuses him of rape.
These crimes sometimes being difficult to prove, and certainly in 1998, and sometimes victims being unwilling to go through with it because the support perhaps wasn't there for them at the time. It came to nothing in terms of a prosecution, but again we have a very serious precursor and indication of how Hardy was prepared to treat women.
Hardy is arrested, but eventually released because of a lack of evidence. Each time he has been accused of serious violent crime, he's been set free to strike again.
He's thinking, well, you know, I'm untouchable. I can do what I like. They're not going to get me.
The untouchable can display a semblance of normality. Hardy's neighbour, Alan Young, remembers nothing sinister about their first meeting.
I was in the courtyard, which I normally do with decent weather, just having a beer, and he poodled in the courtyard one day and just sat down and started talking. Come across probably as a lonely bloke anyway, so I've never seen him. But we just had conversations, that's all. Just everyday topics, things out, bit of politics, this, that and the other. And that was it. And that's how we first met.
Hardy likes the company, but is careful not to reveal too much.
He wouldn't tell me about his past or anything like that. Then you think, OK.
But there is one thing Hardy can't hide from his friend, that he's on medication for his mental illness, one still diagnosed as depression.
He looked sometimes as though he weren't there in the eyes, like, you know, he's on Planet Zod. Obviously, he might be under medication, but there again, I never delved into that.
In January 2002, a chain of events is set in motion which will result in the discovery of the first woman to be found dead in Hardy's flat. Sally Rose White, a vulnerable King's Cross prostitute, is working the streets. It was an average night with a normal string of punters, but for one terrible exception. She comes across Tony Hardy. The next night, Sally doesn't return to the streets. None of her fellow sex workers know where she is. They do know she is particularly at risk.
Sally Rose White had physical difficulties from birth with her spinal cord, but this also caused sort of behavioural difficulties for her as well as physical ones.
The same week, police are called to Hardy's council flat to investigate a report of criminal damage.
There was one neighbour who he had taken a dislike to and had planned to get some revenge on them for their shower or their bath dripping water into his flat.
It's a relatively minor neighbour dispute, but Hardy loses all sense of perspective. His response is extreme. He gets black paint and daubs obscenities on the front door of the woman's flat, and then he adds a sinister flourish to his work.
It wasn't just simple criminal damage. This was really rather nasty abuse across the door and battery acid through the letterbox. They already knew that they were dealing with somebody who was potentially quite dangerous.
Hardy was hiding a gruesome secret as police arrive. He gives nothing away.
He was there, perfectly calm and composed, and they talked to him. But one thing they did discover was there was a door that was locked in his house.
Hardy tells police that the locked room is used by a lodger and he doesn't have the key. He's arrested and told to get a coat prior to going to the station. As he reaches for it, police seize the coat and find a key, which opens the door.
What they found then was obviously quite horrific for anybody to find. They found, lying on the bed, the naked body of a woman. We're thinking the worst. We're thinking suspicious. We're thinking, has he killed this woman?
It is Sally Ann Rose. On the walls there are satanic markings. A stack of pornographic videos are piled on a table.
It must have been quite a horrific thing to realise that they were encountering a body and probably had in their midst a murderer.
Sally's body had been arranged on a bed for a macabre photo shoot.
There was photographic equipment set up. It looked as if she was being posed, ready to take photographs.
In 1888, Jack the Ripper laid out one of his victims on a bed. Her name was Mary Kelly. Sally Ann Rose had suffered head and neck injuries, and there was a bite mark on her leg. Criminologist Jane Monckton Smith believes this was how Hardy got his sexual kicks.
Anthony Hardy was unable to get sexual satisfaction from ordinary sex. He himself had complained that it was making him very frustrated and very, very angry. It was something that he couldn't control. The sadism started to go up. The act of killing women actually provided him with some satisfaction sexually.
Hardy tells the police that he has no idea how she came to be there, but there is a bucket of soapy water by the bed, and it's still warm. Has he been cleaning away a bloody mess? It seems damning evidence. He is taken into custody and looks to be facing an automatic life sentence for murder, but the investigating officers could never have predicted what would happen next.
Any policeman would have thought that they'd found a murderer and this was banged to rights. They could put it before a jury, then it would go quite steadily towards a conviction, and the man would have been taken off the streets. But they encountered a pathologist who seemed to think that this lady had died from natural causes.
Amazingly, an experienced Home Office pathologist, who was later suspended for incompetence, decides the prostitute wasn't murdered.
The police must have been infuriated when a coroner rules someone who was found naked with a smack to the back of their head. They must have been absolutely astonished that a coroner would say that this was natural causes. I mean, to them, they must have been convinced this girl died from a heart attack through fear.
Had Sally Rose White been completely healthy from birth and not had these difficulties, then it might have been that the decision that she died of natural causes wouldn't have been so easy to come to.
At that point, there was no murder, no matter what position her body was found in, how strange it was, the photographic equipment set up in the room, all of those things. If there's no crime for the police to investigate, they can really go no further.
The pathologist's verdict of natural causes must have been music to the ears of Anthony Hardy.
Now, as soon as he hears those words, Mr. Hardy is on top. I think if the police had arrived an hour later, they may well have found the body in a totally different state to what it was found in. But he was lucky, he was relieved, and probably thought now he was better than the police.
Hardy's track record is beyond belief. The attempted murder of his wife in Tasmania, an alleged rape, and now the grisly discovery of a woman's body in his flat. Meanwhile, Anthony Hardy carries on with his neighbour as if nothing has happened.
I didn't say nothing, funny enough. He said it, I suppose, oh, you saw me in the paper. I said, Tony, yeah, I did. And he said, oh, you said, do you believe me I didn't do it? I said, Tony, if you said so, who am I to call you a liar? And that was it. And that was the last time I saw him.
Tony Hardy has killed for the first time, and he's got away with it. Despite their suspicions that Tony Hardy is a killer, the police can only charge him for the damage to his neighbour's door, a comparatively trivial crime. Even then, Hardy uses his condition to persuade the authorities to send him to hospital and not to jail.
He used his mental illnesses as a smokescreen to try to evade detection and to try to justify who he was and how he behaved.
He is sectioned under the Mental Health Act. It's a very familiar pattern for a man who already knows that he's got away with murder. Detained inside St. Luke's Hospital, close to Camden, Hardy is totally compliant as, once again, he tries to outsmart the doctors.
He probably felt that he was a lot more in control than they thought. He was not revealing his problems to the psychologists there or the psychiatrists there at all. He was hiding that.
It's just like his spell in the Australian Mental Institute. Once again, his psychiatric treatment seems to be a quick-fire success.
It came to November of 2002, and there was a panel convened, an administrative panel to decide on his future. And although the medical professionals were still saying he should stay and should remain, the panel came to the decision that he could be released.
Just 11 months after a dead, naked prostitute was found spread-eagled on a bed in his flat, Anthony Hardy is released, free to walk the streets, free to strike again, and commit the crimes that will ensure his name will go down in history.
He became a free man, being able to do what he wants. He would continue to abuse alcohol, drugs, pornography.
Just before Christmas 2002, and Hardy is back into his old habits, the relentless pursuit of ever more violent sex. He writes love letters to prostitutes, inviting them to visit his flat. He tries anything to get them back. He meets Elizabeth Vallard, another King's Cross prostitute. They casually chat.
From what we know, Elizabeth would have gone back to Hardy's flat, in all probability, with the offer of him supplying drugs to her.
Exactly as Hardy planned. Inside, he can fulfill his bizarre sexual fantasies, try to emulate the man who absorbs his thoughts.
We know that they did indulge in extreme sex and bondage, which ended with Elizabeth Vallard being strangled.
Hardy's violent sexual demands end with the death of another woman. Next, he arranges her body for the photos that he intends to take.
She was then posed sexually, a devil mask, devil iconography. She was posed and photographed, which is apparently how Anthony Hardy achieved satisfaction.
Mr. Hardy committed a crime and took a picture of that, almost as if he was proud to have committed the crime and photographed it. Some killers do respond like that. It's his work, he's proud of his work.
Hardy sends the negatives to a friend for safekeeping. Weeks later, that friend hands them to the police, too late to raise the alarm and save another life. Bridget McLennan, a New Zealander, is working her patch in King's Cross. Hardy is stalking the same streets, ready to take control of the life of a vulnerable woman before killing her. He persuades Bridget to return with him to his flat. She'll never be seen alive again.
Once again, the object of the murder seems to have been taking these photographs. There were those photographs of Bridget as well in similar poses to those found relating to Elizabeth.
Jane Monckton-Smith's experience of criminal motives leaves her in no doubt why Hardy killed.
He appeared to be using devil-worshipping iconography, but the ritual would be more how he would achieve sexual satisfaction. That was the ritual element to this, I think, and the posing of the bodies really reveals where his sexual depravities were.
Hardy now has the bodies of 2 dead women in his flat, but neighbours are totally unaware. The only thing they notice are what sounds like late-night home improvements coming from Hardy's flat.
When the neighbours heard the sawing, they probably were reluctant to challenge him, to ask what he was doing. They thought probably the best thing to do was avoid the local nutter.
What was Hardy doing behind closed doors? In his council flat, he has everything in place. The detail is meticulous. He's acquired 2 tools. He puts on rubber gloves and then begins his gory task.
The bodies of both Bridget and Elizabeth were dismembered using a hacksaw, but also an electric power saw.
They found human flesh on both of those saws in his flat.
The sawing noises heard by neighbours in early December suddenly become a sickening soundtrack to murder. Hardy callously cuts up the 2 prostitutes so that he can take them out of his flat without suspicion.
Dismemberment is quite a horrific act. The ability to be able to do it suggests someone who is firstly utterly cold and calculating, and secondly determined to dispose of the evidence.
And dismemberment also echoes the deeds of Jack the Ripper. Hardy puts the body parts in bin bags, taking care that everything is completely concealed. Then he brazenly throws them away into huge communal waste bins in areas close to the block of flats where the killings took place.
He was dumping them in various bins around the area, perhaps to see just how blatant he could be. It could be that he thought that he would never get caught and was having a bit of a game.
I mean, he'd already effectively got away with a crime many months earlier with the discovery of the naked body. Perhaps he was teasing people. Perhaps he was teasing the police. Come and get me. I'll beat you again.
Hardy had killed 2 prostitutes, brutally dismembered their bodies, and thrown their remains into rubbish bins in areas which he knew were covered by CCTV cameras. Hardy seems to relish in that fact.
The CCTV camera was so close to where these body parts were found that Hardy must have known that he would be captured on it. There's a suggestion on the film actually that he looks up at the camera and acknowledges its presence.
Does Anthony Hardy think that he is beyond the law, as Jack the Ripper had been before him? It is the night before New Year's Eve 2002, and a vagrant rummages in a bin for food. It is 4 weeks since the death of Elizabeth Vallard.
He put his hand in, and he thought they were pieces of salmon. And as he pulled them out, he found 2 legs, and it must have been a shocking thing to find.
It just happened. Didn't know nothing about it. The next minute I know, it's all cordoned off. I can't get out. Police want to know where I am, where I lived. I said, what happened? He said, oh, there's been a murder or something.
The area is immediately locked down and a detailed police search is launched.
The police started finding more body parts, which were bound up and put into bin bags and chucked in various bins around Camden.
It is barely a year since the police found a woman's body in Anthony Hardy's flat, so he is their prime suspect. Their suspicions are quickly confirmed when they enter his flat to discover the sickening aftermath of his crimes.
Hardy wasn't there, and there was plenty of evidence of dismemberment having taken place within that flat.
They found a torso wrapped in bin liners. They found a saw with flesh on there.
A very gruesome and strange, bizarre sight for the officers.
Anthony Hardy has fled the scene, leaving a media frenzy in his wake. And it's now that a man who modelled himself on Jack the Ripper gets the tabloid title he may have wanted all along. Anthony Hardy becomes the Camden Ripper.
Mr. Hardy, around Christmas, January time, 2002-2003, would have been the most wanted man in London.
Hardy's face is splashed across the national news. 2 old friends are astonished by the developments.
Never dreamed of it. No way. He didn't look like a mass murderer or a mad axe-killer or what you want to call him. He did not come across to me like that.
I think I was angry, really angry, that I knew somebody like that. And I can't understand, even to this day, how he could do it.
As far as I was concerned, the conversations we have, very nice person. But there you go. You never know.
But Hardy still seems to believe he's untouchable. He brazenly stays in the Camden area, making only minor efforts to disguise his appearance.
Rather than go into hiding and disappear from London, he just shaved off his beard and roamed around the streets. He went from hospital to hospital and didn't really do that much to avoid being caught.
Hardy needs medicine for his diabetes, but hospital staff that he approaches don't realise who he is. Finally, after 3 days as Britain's most wanted man, Anthony Hardy is arrested. But even as he's captured, some think Hardy is still in control.
I don't, for 1 minute, think that Tony was caught by the police. I honestly believe that Tony wanted to be caught.
Perhaps he thought yet again that what evidence have the police got? I'm not going to admit to nothing.
Hardy refuses to answer any police questions.
No comment. Have you ever used that bin, Tony? No comment. You ever gone to that bin at all? No comment. Ever put any rubbish in it? No comment. Or ever taken any rubbish out of it? No comment.
He wasn't trying to talk his way out. He obviously thought he was clever enough that he didn't have anything to say, and let's see what the police can prove.
After everything that he's got away with, the Camden Ripper is a man who is convinced that he truly is smarter than the police. Much of the evidence against him has been disposed of.
Yesterday and the day before, you'll recall that I made a plea, and so did DC Baker, and passionate plea to you.
The hands and the head of these bodies have never been found.
Can you help me with that, please?
The key identifying parts of a body.
No comment.
The rest of the bodies were dumped in such a haphazard fashion, almost as if he was testing the police.
In court, Anthony Hardy initially denies murder, but on the first morning of his trial, he establishes control over proceedings. He admits killing the 2 prostitutes, but also pleads guilty to killing the first woman found dead in his flat, accepting responsibility for a case that the pathologist and the police had not been able to prove. Hardy was given 3 life sentences. This time he wasn't able to use mental illness as an escape to hospital.
I don't for 1 minute think he is insane, and I won't ever change my mind on that one.
What's clear is that he was bad, not mad.
When you're not insane and you do something like that, you have to be evil. You've got to be very evil. And I'm 100% that he knew what he was doing.
Hardy was ultimately given a whole life prison tariff, a hardline measure that was confirmed by the European Court of Human Rights early in 2012.
He will never be released back into the community. He's seen as far too dangerous. And that's quite rare, in fact, for a whole life tariff to be handed down.
But is Anthony Hardy still in control of matters? There are similar crimes that remain unsolved in that part of London. Was Hardy the killer?
There are other murders that occurred where the bodies have been disposed of in a similar way, chopped up and put in rivers or whatever. So he may well have far more victims than we know about, possibly. It's been speculated maybe up to 9.
The fact that he'd been able to get away effectively with all these things he was doing, or the things we know about that he was doing, I've no doubt there was probably more to it that he'd also got away with.
And if he has got away with murders that nobody has detected, he truly will have emulated Britain's most notorious killer, and Anthony Hardy's hero.
Do I think he's killed a lot more? Yes. Will he ever tell anyone? I don't know. I think he's just gone and done what Jack the Ripper's gone and done, only worse.